Gatekeeper has 7 playable characters, 2 of which are available from the start, and 5 of which are unlocked by completing certain tasks. Each character has 4 active, 1 passive skill. And while the skills function a bit differently, you can kind of think of them as fitting into several broad playstyles. Your first is your default attack. Your second is often an AoE move. The third tends to be defensive or mobility, and the fourth skill has a longer cooldown but provides a large burst of damage. Combine these skills with different artifacts to make your own unique build. And so today, I'm going to be going over all the characters, starting with a quick overview of how to unlock them and their abilities, then getting into some gameplay and talking about a lot of the choices that I personally tend to make when I'm playing these characters, along with showing some of their skills in action. And for more gaming guides, news, reviews, and first impressions, do be sure to get subscribed, and hey, if you enjoyed the video or find it helpful, leave a like while you're down there. But for now, let's start talking about those character abilities. Alright, so here are the 7 characters. There's 2 you have unlocked from the start, 5 you have to unlock through gameplay. First up, Hybrid. This is the range-themed character. So, shells just fire forwards and deal damage, pretty straightforward. Whisper, after a slight delay, you fire an exploding orb. This deals a good amount of damage, but it's a little hard to aim. Blink is great for getting yourself out of danger, or if you're lazy with it, getting yourself into danger. Then External Bios is the ultimate ability, and it bounces between multiple targets. This is really good for multi-target DPS, and really poor for single-target DPS, because it only bounces once if you only have one target. Then Hybrid's ability is Replicant, so when you die, you get a 50% damage boost and a second life. That said, I would not go dying just to get the damage boost. Honestly, you can do better than that. You can die because you made a mistake. Trust me, it happens a lot, especially later in the run. Then you have Nidium, the character in the melee archetype. Nidium's Empty Hands is a slash with a wide range. Then Circular, the claws form a loop and get thrown at an enemy, which then returns. This does pretty low damage if you only hit once, or good damage if you hit twice. Cleaver, a dash with a damaging pulse at the end. Don't use it for the damage, use it for mobility. Otherwise you'll get yourself into trouble. And then Ritual, Nidium's best ability in my opinion, that provides massive burst damage by spawning a bunch of crows that fly at nearby enemies. You can either use this at close range to shotgun a boss, or at long range to rain down death on a wide group of foes. Nidium's ability Bloodlust, you have a chance to gain a damage bonus when you're hitting enemies. If you are constantly in combat, this will stay up, otherwise it falls off pretty quickly. Next up you have Pandora, who is unlocked by ascending at the Apotheosis, in other words, winning a run by progressing through all 12 stages. Luminary, pretty much the same attack as Hybrid, just a bolt that fires forwards, though in this case it does have a cleaving ability due to Haunting Luminary, the passive ability for this character. Emission is a giant beam. You fire this beam out, it deals a pulse of damage. It's really easy to hit stuff, hits very hard. I think this is one of the best secondary abilities in the game. Healing Dash works just like the teleport, except you create a healing circle at the end. Really fun, it heals up to 40% of your health. And Lightning Conductor, you pick a circle on the ground, you mark it, and then lightning rains down on foes within. This is very, very good. It slows enemies, keeping them within the circle for longer, and it pulses for about 5 seconds. Very few things survive this, making it quite powerful. Then you have Bastion, the tank character. Bastion is unlocked by getting to the Aurora Runewood, finding Bastion's weapon, and spending the resources to buy the character. Dawnbreaker, you deal massive damage in a wide range using your hammer, and it deals additional damage to stunned enemies. Luckily, your other abilities either inflict stun naturally or can be upgraded to do so. Then Earthshatter, slam your hammer into the ground, creating a shockwave that deals heavy damage to enemies trapped within. It should be noted that while the damage isn't mentioned here, it hits quite hard. Then Valiant Charge, which is very similar to Nidium's movement ability, except instead of damaging things at the end, damages them during the transit. Again though, really use this for mobility rather than to damage foes. And you have Roar, this is your first stun, it deals a good bit of damage, and overall, it's quite easy to use. If you're ever in danger, you can stun all the enemies and simply walk away from them. Or you can stun them and then unload for massive damage with Dawnbreaker. Last up, Rising Fury, you get a damage bonus for being near enemies. This is enhanced if you're near a Siren, aka a boss. Then you have Tech Hunter, who is unlocked by doing basically the opposite of Pandora. This bounty hunter / rogue type unlocks when you go all the way to the end, but instead of ascending at the Apotheosis, you loop through again with the Corium. Your main ability is a shotgun. This fires multiple pellets. Each one does not do very much damage. However, if you can get a bunch to overlap at close range, this hits quite hard, especially once you upgrade it to get pierces. Vacuum, you throw a vacuum grenade that, after delay, detonates, pulling in enemies. Don't kite enemies too far away from your vacuum grenade, and you'll have a good time, as it does hit very hard. Trace is really interesting. You leave a copy of yourself behind that is linked to you permanently, or at the very least for the rest of a round. Then, at any time, you can reactivate this ability to teleport back to your trace. If you remember where your trace is and position it well, this is incredibly powerful. And last up, Onslaught, you mark an enemy. After a short delay, orbital bombardment destroys them and anything standing near them. Because this is targeted on a specific enemy, be aware of which enemies are highly mobile and which ones are likely to move away from your intended target. For example, when you're using this on a siren, always target the siren directly rather than an ad. Tech Hunter's ability explains why he feels a little bit weak at the start. Hunter's Luck. You have a chance to drop a random modifier vis-a-vis white tier artifacts. So because you can get extra power, he starts off a little weaker, but by endgame does scale incredibly well. Next, we have the Warlock or Curse-themed character Mediator. This one is not my favorite because I find the gameplay to be awkward, but hey, if you complete 60 stages, basically just play the game, you'll unlock him. So first up, Cranium Scatter. You throw a projectile that deals damage, and then create smaller projectiles that deal damage. These can overlap on a single target. Pain Conduit, you mark an enemy, and then deal damage to them to spread that damage to all things within the circle. The problem here is if another enemy gets in the way, blocks your shot, you won't be dealing too much extra damage. Ghostwalk, you become immaterial for 6 seconds. This is complete invulnerability and enemies ignore you. But if you do anything except run around, reposition, then you'll be dropped out early. Harvest, you pull souls from enemies towards your location. Because they are towards your location, you have to kind of activate this, then awkwardly kite back to try to get as many of the souls as possible to overlap with multiple enemies. This is great when there's a boss with a bunch of ads crowded around it, but otherwise can feel very awkward to use. Last up, Purification Rite. Certain properties of cursed artifacts become more advantageous. Basically, you need to get cursed artifacts for this, which is a pretty big ask. You'll get a few every run, but unless you're going very long or you're exceptionally lucky, I don't find this to be too impactful. So to unlock Echo, you need to come to the desert planet. Then you need to activate these little glowing generators in the correct order. So you can see me going through here. I activated the first one right at the start. Then I come up towards the middle of a room and activate the second one before going to the far left and activating the third. Then I'm going to come all the way across, back towards the bottom right where I came from initially, and activate the fourth and final generator, completing the puzzle and allowing me to unlock Echo. Once this is done, you're good to go back to the menu and play your brand new unlocked character. So if you did the capsule correctly, you should have Echo. Let's go over Echo's abilities now. This Sonic-themed character is a lot of fun and rapidly becoming one of my favorites. First up, Pulse. This deals damage to an enemy and creates a sound wave around them, damaging other nearby foes. So your attack inherently has AoE and it's targeted. This makes it very, very powerful. Next up, Harmonic Explosion. This is a slightly delayed damage pulse. It's lower damage than many of the other things, but does have a knockback that can be quite nice for getting things out of your way. Breach, on the other hand, your movement skill is very powerful. It deals 300% damage, much higher than the other movement skills, so you'll often want to use it to damage foes rather than simply for mobility. Use this to carry yourself through enemies, fire it through them. It'll go 1, 2, 3, pass clear through the enemies. You can activate it again, teleport to that location once you're safely on the other side. And Consonance. You create a tuning fork, then immediately spam your pulse within the tuning fork to deal massive damage to enemies as it increases the AoE and charges everything around you. This is done from your Resonance passive. Basically, drop tuning fork, do big damage, kill giant groups of enemies. That's Echo's gameplay. So first up we have Hybrid, which reminds me a lot of Huntress crossed with Commando if you've played Risk of Rain 2. Hybrid's first ability is a simple forward-firing shot that deals damage and is quite easy to aim. Use this to take out most enemies. You can actually build into this for a quite powerful build capable of doing high single-target damage. Just keep in mind that it doesn't have any AoE, nor is there any way to add AoE. That's where the second ability comes in. Charge it up after a very short delay and fire it off to blast enemies. This AoE can also be used to set enemies on fire by igniting them through an upgrade. Ignite is a keyword. It means enemies take fire damage over time, and it also enables other bonuses on some of Hybrid's abilities. Then third up, you can use the Blink to get out of danger. Use this when stuff's shooting at you, about to melee you, or you're a little bit too close to a dangerous siren. And last but certainly not least, Hybrid's fourth ability, bounces between multiple enemies, so again, this is not for pure single target damage. If you are fighting a Siren or some other form of tanky enemy, don't simply spam it. Instead, wait for a second enemy to wander over, so that the projectile bounces between them, dealing the maximum amount of damage. If it runs out of enemies to bounce between, it will also stop dealing damage. You combine all of these things for a quite fluid and fun playstyle that very much again reminds me of Hunter crossed with Commando. I tend to either max out the first ability or the fourth ability, but there's always a little bit of personal choice and it kind of depends on which artifacts you get. I also don't tend to prefer close range artifacts since I like being able to stand back and blast enemies from a distance. Next up on Nidium, your attack is a close range slash, so you're really going to need to get up and in the face of groups of enemies. Maybe grab a few extra defenses to help with that. But hey, because it's innately an AoE, you can cleave through a lot of them, and you can enhance this to make a combo strike where certain hits will be much stronger. After that, if you want to add a little bit of range damage, use Nidium's second ability, where you throw a circular vortex of destruction that scythes through enemies. This does pretty light damage if you only hit one, so be careful to reposition yourself after throwing it to get it to fly back through as many different enemies as possible. Think of this as a fun little reposition minigame, though personally I haven't experimented with upgrading this too much because I often find it's a little too difficult to use and some of the abilities are just a bit stronger. Now, Nidium's third ability does deal damage, but as you'll see here, I'm primarily going to be using it to escape enemies, because landing all that damage right at the end really isn't worth it versus saving the dash for when you need to get out of something or away from a boss. Remember, as a melee, some of the boss mechanics, like with Collector, can be a little bit melee unfriendly, so just approach them with caution. And last but certainly not least, Nidium's fourth ability, the Crows, is absolutely insane. This is almost always what I max first, and I have yet to regret my decisions. Because you fire the Crows, they heal you after you fire them, they deal even more damage. The first upgrade is totally insane in that regard, and you can even get more Crows by taking that grand third upgrade. Nidium is pretty much everything you'd want in a melee archetype. You're able to get up into things' faces, but also blast everything around you with a decent bit of range by using stuff like the Crows and the secondary ability. Back when I first played this, specifically the demo version, I looped a game for over an hour and a half just by playing Nidium and spamming Crows on everything. It was absolutely overpowered and started to delete bosses until I finally got outscaled. So just because you start with Nidium doesn't mean he's not quite powerful. Alright, next up we have Pandora the Spellcaster. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on her first skill because, to be honest with you, it basically plays identically to Hybrid's first skill. You fire a beam in front of you, with the only slight bonus being it can sometimes bounce to enemies. Though fire it into large clusters or groups, watch it bounce around. It does a little bit of AoE, but it's still primarily single target. What does stand out, though, is her secondary. Not only does this fire an incredibly wide beam, it's very easy to use, there's almost no delay, but also it can be upgraded to stun stuff. I really like using her secondary, and I found it to be highly effective at eliminating both tankier single foes, or at the very least stunning them so I can burn them down, and large groups of enemies. Now, her mobility skill also works pretty darn similarly to Hybrid's, with one very big exception. Once you end the teleport, it creates a healing circle. This will heal up to 40% of your health over 5 seconds. So stand in the circle and avoid damage from enemies to get a little bit of that health back. If you're a low regen build, this is an absolute godsend. Though, if you have enough recovery from other sources, you probably don't need to worry about the healing and can just treat this as a teleport. Last but certainly not least, her fourth skill creates a circle on the ground. Its duration can be extended significantly with upgrades, making it an ideal candidate, and it also does a lot of damage. Again, if you watch here as enemies move around within the circle, the slow really comes in handy, because if they want to escape, they just can't. Overall, my experience with Pandora has been a little bit mixed, because in some ways, I like that she fulfills the magic caster archetype, and her secondary skill is really fun to use. But overall, I kind of feel like she often ends up being a weaker version of Hybrid. While you can get quite a bit of damage, you are exceedingly squishy and need to be very careful. Basically, if you're ever offered the option for a defensive or health artifact, you should absolutely take it because you have plenty of damage. Trust me, your damage is fine. Oh boy, will you be squishy, and it can be very easy to die because you don't have a second life. Then you have Bastion, which has one of my favorite playstyles because you get safety while standing in the middle of large groups of enemies simply by stunning them. So, to start with, your attack cleaves a wide range of enemies. This does a lot of damage in a very short time, especially if you're able to stun things, and you can upgrade it for higher attack speed, which feels really, really good. Upgrading Bastion's attack first is honestly one of my favorite ways to play the character, because it just makes everything so buttery smooth. But if you felt like, hey, my AoE on Bastion, still not enough, I need even more AoE, well, your secondary ability provides AoE to go with your AoE, and by that I mean once you upgrade it, it actually does trigger multiple times, dealing massive damage in the process. Remember, Bastion's whole thing is stun, so upgrades will be handy in that regard too. If you can get anything like crit against stunned enemies, you're going to be a very, very happy Bastion. Your third ability provides, well, movement. And while I haven't really upgraded it too frequently, I do find it's very good for getting away from foes, or maybe repositioning myself because I want to be aggressive and use my fourth ability. Charge straight into a group, stun everything, get a massive damage bonus, and then unleash my secondary, start hammering away with my primary. Bastion's fourth skill offers an incredible baseline, but I found that the upgrades are a little bit lackluster, but I have found that fully upgrading the fourth skill can feel a little bit lackluster just because it's split between damage and defenses. So while you can get some extra utility out there, you can get some health back whenever you use it, you do get an attack speed steroid. Most of the time, I tend to upgrade the first and second skills. Speaking of, when fully upgraded, the first skill scales up your maximum health, so stacking life is always a really good idea on this tankiest of tank characters. But hey, you're the kind of tank that deals damage and bashes stuff in the face. You're going to get off to an awkward start with Tech Hunter, as you're desperately trying to snipe down enemies with your shotgun, while making sure to stay at close enough range that your pellets actually overlap on them. This is largely fixed though in the long term, because if you upgrade the shotgun, it gets additional pellets, but pellets inflict a bleed, and they can pierce enemies, turning your attack into a pseudo AoE that does quite a bit of cleave damage. On the other hand, if you prefer to build into the grenade, well, you can spawn extra grenades by killing enemies with it, but this does require 3 whole upgrade levels, so you're going to take a little bit to get there, and in the meantime you need to kite enemies kind of in a circle so that they don't move out of your grenade's explosion. Then the movement skill, honestly, this is very much a make or break with the character. You will either love the ability to drop a clone of yourself, maybe at an objective, run halfway across the map, laugh at some enemies along the way, and then pop it to instantly teleport back and complete the objective, or you'll hate the fact that in the middle of a siren fight, you forgot to drop it, you attempt to drop it, you then try to dodge an AoE by using it, and go right back into that same AoE and die. It is very much an acquired taste, and at first I kind of hated Tech Hunter, but the more I've played Tech Hunter, the more I realized, no, I was just really bad with Tech Hunter. One thing that does just work out of the box is the fourth ability. This is very much a fire and forget fuck off laser. So if you want to orbital strike anything out of existence, make sure to max these upgrades first. And because it can, like the grenades, drop a little bit of a fire puddle, there's plenty of elemental damage to kite the enemies through afterwards. Remember, Tech Hunter's passive gives you artifacts, so over time your power curve will increase, but as a result his baseline is a little bit lower. Personally, I've had the most fun maxing the first and fourth abilities, though the infinite grenade bouncing thing can be very cool as well. It's just that most of the time, by the time the third or fourth grenade goes off, the enemies are already very dead anyway, or they've easily moved out of the radius of the AoE. Alright, subjective opinion warning, I don't find Mediator fun. First of all, it feels like all of his attacks have a weird delay on them, or in the case of his first ability, a weird double delay, where it's a delay to fire the projectile. You have to kind of click your mouse rather than holding the button down to fire smoothly like with many of the other characters, and then you have to wait for the projectiles to explode. The second ability feels awkward to me because you have to hit the enemy in the curse ring to spread the damage to everything else, or I guess I should say curse donut. The problem is half the time enemies try to body block. So, it feels really, really, really awkward. The third ability, okay, that's actually really good. Basically get invulnerability, and who doesn't want invulnerability? It means that you can't do things for a while, but after all, it's not like this is a race against time or anything. Though it is pretty good if you use it a little bit more tactically, rather than letting the entire 6-second duration tick down, such as to phase through a boss ability. Last up, his fourth move. You activate it, you pull a bunch of stuff from enemies, and then try to kite it through more enemies again. This feels really janky and awkward to me. This character has in no way meshed with me. I have tried my best to understand ways to make Mediator good, and personally I am at a complete loss. Upgrades don't seem to help here. They just make it a little bit more tolerable, but overall the character feels like it's just not quite there yet. That said, this is in early access, and once the game releases, it's entirely possible that you'll see a bright and shiny Mediator with a fresh coat of paint who is awesome, like the Curse Cleave. Good in theory, but in practice, I'd rather just play a character like Echo, who can do that far more easily, or pretty much anyone who uses their fourth ability can Curse Cleave much more efficiently. Many people's secondary abilities can also Curse Cleave much more efficiently without having to get all that damage on a single target that's moving around and actively, it seems like, trying to dodge behind its friends. Then you have Echo, who is of course Sonic themed. Echo's first ability creates an AoE of a point of impact, damaging nearby enemies. This is incredibly effective at cleaving through groups because you can pick the target right at the center of a group and it'll splash onto everything else. The second ability creates a sphere that explodes after a short duration, knocking foes back. It isn't the most damaging and can be a little bit tricky to use due to the delay, but it's also very good as an emergency escape. Just drop it behind you and have it knock stuff away from you. Or drop it directly on your location if you think you're going to get swarmed and overrun. After that, we've got Echo's movement skill, which honestly is the best movement skill in the game. You fire out a disc that deals heavy damage to enemies, then use the ability again to teleport to it. You're basically surfing on your disc, crashing into stuff, dealing heavy damage. There's even some upgrades that allow you to fire it into your tuning fork to deal even more damage by splitting it off into several other discs. This is one of the things that sold me on the character to begin with. And then you have the tuning fork, which is basically, I pick an area, everything within that area is going to get completely destroyed by AoE, because it charges everything within the area with resonance, allowing you to AoE in a larger radius by using your first ability. If you further enhance both the tuning fork and the first ability, the amount of burst damage that you put out is actually insane. I've completely melted Sirens, the boss enemies in the game, along with the entire group of everything around them, just by dropping a tuning fork once it's fully upgraded. Takes a little bit of effort to unlock the character, but trust me, it is absolutely worth it. Alright, to end things off, let's do a fun little tier list, because everyone loves tier lists. To get the qualifications out of the way, S tier is a favorite character, a character I've had a lot of personal success with. C tier is one that I don't like playing. So this is all about my own experience, and like you know, my own personal experience is the objective truth of the world. So anything I say is going to be completely correct, fully accurate, you'll feel the same. Now I'm just kidding. If you feel like this is different, maybe a character that I put in C tier you've had a ton of fun with, you'll love it, you win every run, let me know down below, because at the end of the day, this is just everyone's opinion. So, first up, Hybrid. Hybrid is pretty darn solid, was a good introduction to the game. Unfortunately, I can't put Hybrid dead in the middle because I made myself 4 total tiers, S, A, B, and C. So I'm going to go slightly above average. Hybrid's good, fun to play. Next up, Nidium, which I'm going to go down to B tier, because Nidium is really awesome once you get to the crow spam point. But until then, can be a little bit of an acquired taste, especially if you're not used to playing melee in the game. Pandora, also B, and I'm going to put Pandora kind of bottom of B just because I find Pandora to be a worse hybrid. They do a lot of the same things, Hybrid just happens to do them a little teeny bit better. Bastion, on the other hand, Bastion's really fun, really strong. This is going to be my first S tier. I love me some Bastion. It's one of my favorite indie games. Oh wait, I'm talking about the character, right? Not the indie game, though it is absolutely wonderful and you should play it. But no, Bastion, the character, also very fun, being able to scale a ton of health and turn that into damage. Really, really, really strong. Next up, Tech Hunter. Tech Hunter, also going to go in B tier, but slightly above Pandora. Tech Hunter's pretty okay. I've had a generally good time. Took a little bit to get used to. Some of her runs definitely start off a little rough. They end very strong. Mediator C tier. I do not like Mediator at all, or the playstyle, or the fact that everything feels delayed. And Echo into S tier. A very easy S tier, actually. As soon as I unlocked Echo, I was like, wait, where's this character for the entire rest of my playtime? I played this game for like 20 hours without unlocking the character because I just didn't think to do the puzzle on the level. You should absolutely unlock Echo sooner. There's a little bit of a guide earlier in the video. I've had a ton of fun playing Echo, and along with Bastion, these are most of my runs these days. So that's my tier list, but let me know down below what characters are your favorite and what characters you don't like playing. So those are all the characters in Gatekeeper, how to unlock them, a little bit about their abilities and playstyle, plus my own personal tier list for how I'd rank them based on my success and what I find fun. In other words, it's going to be lots of Bastion because I've been playing a ton of that, Lots of Echo, also a super fun playstyle to me, not very much Mediator, because man, that character just feels really lackluster. But again, your experience very well may be different. If there's a specific section of this video you're curious about, feel free to use the timestamps to jump back. And if you want to know my overall thoughts on the game, then I'll have a video up in the card and down below when I reviewed the game shortly before the early access launched. Since then, I've done a few more runs, unlocked all the characters, pretty much done every achievement. There's just a couple more that I have to do. And I can definitely say it's a neat little game that I recommend to fans of Risk of Rain. But let me know some of your thoughts down in the comments below. Now, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is down below, and you might even see your name on screen right now. Also, a big thanks to everyone who watched to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed the video, and hey, I hope to see you in the next one.